KCRW sponsors include A24, presenting Moonlight, a film chronicling 3 chapters in the life of a young black man, discovering his identity and experiencing first love as he moves from childhood into manhood. In theaters now.
On To The Point, we try to make sense of the policy debates and the political sideshows on the campaign trail.
Neither party's agenda really aligns with who its coalition is today.
It was the dumbest speech I have ever seen in my life of covering politics.
When people walk into a voting booth, at the end of the day, they do say, I really should vote for someone smarter than me.
I'm Warren Olney. To The Point has you covered for the 2016 campaign. Find the To The Point podcast on KCRW's iTunes page.
From KCRW Santa Monica and KCRW.com, it's The Treatment. Welcome to The Treatment. I'm Elvis Mitchell. It has been too long, way too long, since our old friend and actor, movie star of stage, and of Vicious, one of the best shows on television.
Oh.
Ian McKellen.
Well, you would say that being NPR, wouldn't you?
Yes, I would. It's our charge, our charter, Ian. Ian McKellen sitting across from me. It's been, gosh, like I said to you, you haven't been here since 2003.
Well, I think you've gone grey since I last saw you, but it suits you.
It's been too long. I've gone grey worrying about you. Where in God's name have you been?
Well, I've been working, probably, haven't I?
Well, yes, and your most recent film, which reteams you with Bill Condon, is Mr. Holmes. The first time you were here, in fact, was for Gods and Monsters.
Oh, was that it?
Yes, yes. So
well, I mean, ever since Gods and Monsters, whenever I was going out to Middle Earth, New Zealand, I would pass through LA and go and stay with Bill and his partner Jack in the Hollywood Hills, and we would always say to each other, when are we going to find another movie to do? And one day, not long ago, he called me up and said, I found it. I said, you found what? The movie for us to do. I said, when do we start? I didn't even ask what it was. And it was Mr. Holmes, and this script arrived and was... well, of course it was good, because Bill wouldn't be doing it otherwise. Providing me with a sort of part of a lifetime, really, to play Sherlock Holmes, which was fun. I'm the 130th actor to play Sherlock Holmes. So it was about my turn.
Well, I figure since you've worked with Robert Downey Jr. a couple of times, and he's done Holmes,
right.
You had to do that as well.
And then to be playing older than myself is fun, And then to play him younger than myself in the same movie, that's a joy, you see. And really, really, really terrific part. And there's such a charming idea that Sherlock Holmes is a real person, and that the reporting of his cases that his friend Dr. Watson wrote down, with the help of Arthur Conan Doyle, the author, was not actually the truth. It was his version. And so what you get in this movie is the man who doesn't wear the deerstalker, the guy who has never smoked a pipe and much prefers, like you, a cigar, and it still has the same sort of... It's still a bit of a sociopath, doesn't get on with people, still obsessed with his own mind and his own brilliance.
And his own turn of phrase, actually.
Yes.
He takes a delight in almost the mouthfeel of words.
Yes. Not the sort of person you want to spend the evening with, frankly. But the beauty of this is that by going back into his past, even as his memory is beginning to go, as his body is beginning to ache and pains, he thinks he must make one last effort to remember why it was that 30 years previously he retired. He had left London, went to live on the south coast of England with his bees and his housekeeper and her son. And in solving that mystery, he solves the mystery of his own personality, really, and awakens the heart that perhaps he's neglected too much. So it's a story with a happy ending, actually, and which we need. I mean, I'm optimistic that it's never too late.
Yes, it is. And I just guess I find myself, because the first time we sat down to talk, as we were talking about Gods and Monsters, we also ended up spending a bit of time talking about Richard III.
Oh, yes.
And I just sort of thinking about, really in the last 20 years or so, you've done a number of these kind of revisionist things, between this take on Holmes and that take on Richard III, and then this take really on Gandalf, which is another take on this. It's interesting that you've been taking on these kind of mythic characters over the last 20 years.
Whenever you play a part, then it is your personality, your view of the material, which makes it personal. So in a sense, every part you ever play is a take. When you do Hamlet, every person who plays Hamlet has a chance to be Hamlet, but his own Hamlet. And that's true with Mr. Holmes. But of course, the cleverness of the script is not mine. It's Geoffrey Hatcher and Mitch Cullen who wrote the novel on which it's all based.
Yeah, but also it's incumbent on you to figure out who your Holmes is in the same way you figured out who your Richard III was. And I just thought that's, for me, just sort of looking at these characters that you've branded in this way. I mean, because they're those... And these also are characters that belong to people. I mean, you can say the same thing about Gandalf or Magneto, for that matter. People have a kind of an ownership of them. And so the idea of taking on these characters must fascinate you in some way.
You can't be worrying that so many actors in the past have been so brilliant in the part, and now it's your turn to let Shakespeare down, which you hope not to do. But you just take comfort from the fact that if all those actors have been good, then the part must be worth playing. But the way in which you play it must be personal. But I mean, with Gandalf and with Holmes, I began to try and get inside the character. So, and there was a couple of days way back in 2000 when we were just starting on Lord of the Rings when we had makeup. And I sat there in a variety of beards of all sorts of lengths, moustaches, eyebrows. The eyebrows, Tolkien says in the novel, stretch way beyond the brim of his large hat. Yeah. You couldn't do that in a movie. You'd just look ridiculous. And in fact, the image that we were trying to make was not what Tolkien had described Gandalf as, but the imagined image of Gandalf that had appeared in the illustrations to the books by John Howe and Alan Lee, both of whom were employed on the movie to get the look of Middle-earth right. So they were very much there when we were doing the makeup. And as we just gradually put it on, I suddenly saw Peter Jackson, who's there, brighten up as if he liked what he saw. And I looked in the mirror, and what I saw looking out at me was Gandalf. But actually what I saw looking out at me was John Howe and Alan Lee's Gandalf. Put the hat on. Once I got the hat on, the voice sort of came along. I didn't really have to worry. There's an actor's DNA. And when I stood up, I was sort of walking like Gandalf, and that was it. So, and it was the same with Mr. Holmes. When Dave Elsey came along and put on this rubberized plastic to give me even more wrinkles than I've got. Didn't take him long, about 40 minutes. Shaved the front of my head, sneaked it back. And so image is very important. And Stanislavski, the great director who was the father of the method, which so many American actors have adopted, makes all sorts of suggestions as to how you should act, writes books and books and books about it. But in one of the books he says in the closing chapter, "Dear reader, if all else fails, look in the mirror, pull some faces until you see the character looking back at you." Now, that doesn't mean to say that you must practice your lines looking in the mirror. That wouldn't do at all. But, you know, image is very, very important, obviously, in cinema and close-up, face particularly.
It's the treat. We're talking to our old friend Ian McKellen, who's been away from here way too long.
Thank you.
His new film is Mr. Holmes, in which he plays two versions of Sherlock Holmes. But you're talking about that physicality, and there's a kind of a arrogance in his demeanor. It's more evident as the younger Holmes. But
yes.
It's almost the physical arrogance of an athlete.
Yes,
in the way you play
that's
it.
Very good. Thank you. That's lovely. I particularly like, I'm coming out of Baker Street chasing a woman who I must follow to discover her mystery, and I do a little skip up the step. Not something I'm any longer do in my own life, but I was really pleased with that because it did look as if he had more energy than he was expending, which is youthfulness. You know, the youth has more energy than it can use, and even at 60-odd, Sherlock had a little bit of that. But yes, he's a bit of a stick. He's very upright, top hat, no deerstalker, formal, early 20th century urban clothes, looking as elegant as possible, and rather pleased with himself.
But that's the physical arrogance I was talking about.
Yes, that's right.
And I find that that's something you do pretty often anyway as an actor. I was even thinking back to that quizzical way you use your hands in the shadow. I mean, you really like to find a physical attribute for these characters, don't you?
Absolutely. It's the fun of acting for me. It's a fact of life that we all look different, you know? And it is an amazing fact of life, isn't it? I can never quite believe it, with the exception of twins. We're all different.
No, I have a twin sister, so even twins can look different.
There we go. Good. Though with the state of your hair, I don't know. So we all look different, and is it any surprise that inside we're all different?
It's interesting because I guess I find myself wondering, in a case like this, when you get off of these characters like Gandalf or Holmes, I think these are characters that people really psychologically own, that they feel they feel they belong to them. All the Holmes obsessives, or certainly the Tolkien obsessives, or the Marvel Comics obsessives, who have this idea of what these characters are supposed to be. Do you feel like in some way you have to just not respond to that?
Well, you play with the stereotype or the accepted version of the character, and then with the help of the script, you can play against that. Holmes is a wonderful part to play, and this is an actor who's played King Lear speaking, in that it does examine old age, and often in movies and plays and TV sitcom, there will be an old character or two, and they will be playing the stereotype of the old person. And the beauty of Mr. Holmes is that it examines an old man in the way The Gods and Monsters took a gay man, not as a stereotype, not as someone to be mocked, but just took him as he was, a human being, with failings and virtues, and that's what drama's about, isn't it? And that's what storytelling, it's worth it, is about. It's discovering behind the facade, the familiar facade, in this case of Sherlock Holmes, that there's a beating heart and a human being that one can relate to. So that by the end of the movie, he is someone you'd like to spend the evening with.
But it's also, too, and you just said alluded to something really interesting there, about size. And you're talking about movie stars, and they take up a certain amount of size, both figuratively and literally, on the screen. And these characters that we're talking about are also characters that take up an enormous amount of space in the culture.
I think it's because, and you've only got to look at the daily program of television to see that solving the mystery, as human beings would like to do that every evening, apparently, that there'll be some murder that has to be some murderer that has to be discovered. But the thing is, life is not solved until it stops. So against that certainty of mortality, there can be rather like a crossword puzzle that can be solved. Life reduced to a puzzle that has a solution. So I think that's why detection appeals to us all. I love a good mystery. But why Sherlock Holmes survived? I mean, he was I suppose one of the very first fictional detectives. Well, he's a bit of an outsider, isn't he? And he's superior to the established order of things, the police force who fail to solve the problems. So we rather like him for that reason, don't we? But I think we like him at a distance. We observe him, we admire him, we are appalled by him, or maybe charmed, or all those things. But this is a domestic story. You see him eating, you see him getting grumpy, you see him in bed, you see him falling out of bed.
And actually being cared for by the character played by Laura Linney. We'll take a break. We're talking about any number of things, but it's just good to have a friend back. Our friend Ian McKellen is here. The treatment is more to come. Stay with us.
Are you thinking about buying a new car? Consider donating your old one to KCRW and support the unique mix of news, music, and culture you love. You'll become a KCRW member and get a nice tax write-off. For details, visit kcrw.com/cars.
Welcome back. You will hear a familiar voice. No, not mine. It's the treatment bud. I'm sitting across from Ian McKellen. Sir Ian McKellen, please forgive me. Who is, of course, also, in addition to Mr. Holmes, you're here in Los Angeles because you have this show.
Well, I'm here to remind people who have missed the movie when it was released in
theaters.
Theaters during the summer that you can now buy it on DVD. So that's the message that's going out from me. But I was in that Mill Valley Film Festival earlier in the year, and they were giving me a Lifetime Achievement Award, which I suppose that's an award for being mobile enough to get to Mill Valley. Is that what it is? I don't know. Anyway, before I arrived there, they said the theme of this year's festival was women in film. So why are they giving the prize to me this year? I don't know. So I said, okay, that's the case. I'd like to join in. And I put together very quickly on the hoof a little illustrated chat about women I'd worked with. And you know, when I say, well, we'll start with Sandy Dennis and Ava Gardner, and then we'll go through Meryl Streep and Judi Dench, and we'll land up with Laura Linney. It sounds like a nice roll call of wonderful people, and I have a few gossipy stories to tell about them. So that's what the show is. And so I'm being here in Los Angeles now, and hearing from the president of the Academy at the Governor's Awards the other night that diversity in employment in the industry was crucial, and women's place as equals was of concern. I thought it'd be nice to celebrate that with a few memories. So.
Because you're also, I'm guessing, you're dealing with too the way women were depicted over the years.
You know, I think the first film I ever made.
The Promise?
Oh, you know my career better than I do. The first film that was ever actually shown in the cinemas, we'll put this that way, was called Thank You All Very Much, and it starred Sandy Dennis, and it was based on a novel written by a friend of mine, Margaret Drabble, who I'd been at university with.
Oh my gosh.
And acted with her.
Okay.
And her husband always said that the character I played in the movie had been rather based on me, in that he was clearly a gay man, although that was never gone into. We're talking about the mid-'60s, swinging London, but homosexuality wasn't really on the agenda in those days. But the point is that my character has a one-night stand with Sandy Dennis and gets her pregnant, and she decides not to have an abortion, not to tell me that I fathered the child, not to look for a mate. She will bring the child up on her own. And this was shock horror. It made the book a sensation, and I suppose anyone who saw the film might too have been a bit disturbed by someone being so bold as to want to do that. Well, it's a story that would pass without comment these days, but so the position of women in cinema, yes, is very much related to the position of women in society, I think.
Yes, and also your own relationship to women in cinema too, and what you're talking about. I mean, this idea that book, which was a sensation for a very long time, because it dealt with basically, you know, as you know, as well as anybody, that was illegal behavior.
Crime.
And so tackling that in that book, did you know that character was based on you before you did the movie?
No. I felt at home in it. Yes, it's quite a small part. And I'm not very good in it, I'm afraid. But,
wait, now, why do you say that? You're not very good
well, because, oh dear, watching yourself, and you know what it's like when you look at your photograph album. Those happy times in the past when you were younger and merrier, and you say, what am I wearing? I mean, what have I got on my head? Well, it's you, baby, and that's what you were like. Well, now, watching a film is a million times worse than that, because you're moving, you're speaking, you're pretending to be another person, and it's a very uncomfortable thing to do for me.
My guest sitting across from me, who's worked with people from Michael Mann to Bill Condon, is Sir Ian McKellen. This film, which is now available on home video, which you should see for this great performance, is Mr. Holmes. And one of the things that I guess I've wanted to talk to you about, and that I love that you do, is you find a way, and I was really thinking about than just watching episodes of Vicious, which I love, is finding a way to address a character's vanity. you played a number of vain characters, and it's clear that you're a man who's who's very comfortable with yourself. And that Lear,
Lear, yes, Richard III.
Third, Restoration, all these characters have a kind of so many of these characters, I should say. I can't say all of them. I can't say much about the vanity of your character in The Keep, obviously, but many of these characters deal with their vanity, and you find a way to sort of make that a part of these characters, but also without.
Well, is it the parts I've chosen to play, or is it the way that I am, or is it just that a character that has a certain self-confidence and
sense of presentation
arrogance
too,
to be themselves in whatever situation is likely to be a very good central character for a story, because you'll see collapse of stout party on occasion, and the ego is massive.
I mean, so many of these characters are...
What about Gandalf? Is Gandalf pleased with himself?
I think so.
Yes, he is.
Yes, I definitely think so. You don't dress like that if you're not pleased with yourself. If you're a wizard, you can get any kind of deportment that you want. And to go out like that, clearly there's some suggestion of presentation. And then the presentation of these characters is something that, for me, it gets back to physicality. And this way of sort of showing these characters exist as much on the outside as on the inside. But there's a care that these characters take in the way that they offer themselves up to the world.
You're a reporter and I'm an actor, and we both observe, don't we? And that I agree with your observation that you can tell an awful lot about a person from their appearance. It's surprising, isn't it, how often you're travelling on the subway or walking the streets, neither of which I appreciate you do in Los Angeles, but if you do that and you look at people, you're constantly recognizing types of people. And people look absolutely right. Yes, of course that guy with the ponytail would have that knapsack on his back. Of course he would wear sneakers. He would look wrong if he weren't wearing them. And what pattern have they followed, those people? Sitting next to somebody who's immaculately dressed and whose hair is quiffed in just the way that goes with their vest or their tight trousers. Everybody always looks absolute. I mean, clothes are so important. And movement goes with that, of course. And clothes accommodate movement. And then, of course, the fun of it is, yeah, that's what they look like. That's how they present themselves. I recognize them. I know what they're going to be like before they open their mouths. And then they open their mouths and they're absolutely different from what you expected. And then that's the fun of acting, and it's the fun of observing, and it's the fun of writing a story about people, because appearance is not everything, but it's an awful lot.
But it is in the kind of storytelling that really becomes compelling, because so much of movies or even television is about presentation in a way we just say these are pretty people, rather than the presentation offering some kind of revelation about character or some consideration from the actor's point of view, or collaborating with everybody in the film to sort of say this is who the character is. And I was just thinking about this with your character from Vicious, who is openly presentational in a way that is an announcement, but also wants to be taken seriously, despite this discordance you're talking about, the schism between the way he wants to be regarded and the way he regards himself. And I wonder if that's something that attracted you to him.
Well, when Gary Janetti wrote Vicious, which is a sitcom about two old gay gentlemen who've lived together for 50 years in the centre of London, I was thinking, now, is he quite the right writer for this? Because the story of what's happened for gay people over the last 50 years, which I've lived through, I would hope to see reflected in the story of Freddie, the failed actor, which is the character I play, and Stuart, his partner, played by Derek Jacobi. But no, that was not to be. That wasn't what... This was a sitcom, and in terms of theatre, it was a farce, as you say. It's an exaggeration of human behaviour in order to entertain the audience with laughter. When Derek and I came to do it in front of the cameras, we were also doing it in front of a live audience, which is how sitcoms used to be done. There were 500 people in the studio. Well, of course, we smell an audience, Derek and I, and in the first series, I think we're acting as if we're in the London Palladium, which isn't really appropriate for the camera, which is very, very close. The gals in the show, Marcia Warren and Frankie de la Tour, both brilliant television performers. I could hardly hear what they were saying. It didn't matter because the microphone didn't pick it up. When we came to the second series, I said to Dave, look, we've got to bring our performances down. He never sees himself on screen, so he took my advice. But then we went on a chat show, and they were showing a little bit of the second series when I thought we were down to a proper level of performance. And Derek took one look at it and said, I thought you said we were going to be a bit more real in this. But reality has many forms.
Because what you're talking about, even in farce, if there's not some level, maybe not truth, but believability,
yes,
then it's completely superficial. And if we don't believe it, then it's something you shrug off. Whereas what you're talking about with these characters, one of the reasons I like the show so much is they've got this self-love that sort of like permeates everything around them. Yeah. And you're not making fun of them. And maybe it feels to you like it's too big.
You're laughing with them, really.
I think so. But this gets back to what I was saying before about your being interested in these characters, and Freddie's now one of them, with this enormous sense of personal scale, emotional scale. Yes. I mean, that's something that you're clearly attracted to, isn't it?
Well, good for you. It's an analysis of my choices that I hadn't ever made myself. Another way in which I choose parts is that I don't want it to be a part that I think I've played before.
But there's a sense, even with Holmes being as sort of closed off as he is, a sense of pleasure that these people take in that sense of occupying a lot of space in the world.
I've never mind playing villains. Now, Judi Dench doesn't like playing villains.
Is that true? Why? She plays so many characters that can be perceived.
She likes to play someone who I think could well be frail. This isn't meant as a criticism of her at all. But she attracts love from an audience. And working with her can be rather dodgy because, I mean, the whole audience is falling in love with Judi. And I'm rather the opposite, I think. I'm very attracted to villains because Larry King was saying this the other night I saw on TV. He was saying on British television, he was saying the person he would most like to have interviewed was Adolf Hitler. Because he said, nobody, not even Hitler, gets up in the morning and is combing his hair saying, now, what terrible things am I going to do today? The rest of us observe that they're terrible things, but he doesn't quite get it. And examining why he doesn't get it, of course, is fascinating. So to play Richard III, who does appalling things and orders of deaths all over the place, he does wicked deeds, not because he's just born evil or wicked or anything like that, but because his mother hates him. And she says so. I've hated you from the moment you were born. Well, that's a heavy burden to bear. And if you're ambitious, then you visit that sort of cruelty onto other people. And working out why people behave badly. Iago, too, in Shakespeare's Othello, he is absolutely appalling. But he does tell you why he's appalling, why he's been let down, why he didn't get advancement, why his marriage isn't going very well, why he suspects that his wife's been unfaithful and all sorts of things like that, which have curdled his brains. And so they're fascinating people. And to play a good character, boring, really. I mean, now Gandalf is a good character. He is a good man. He's always on the side of good.
But still, there's again, if he's going to be a good character, that outside sense of self-possession has to be part of it. I mean, he's got to occupy more space in the world than just being somebody who exists.
Yes, he's not just sitting at home being nice to the family. He is out there changing the world. Yeah.
We're out of time. You have to come. You have to come back here in less than 12 years. Will you do this, please?
Much. It's lovely to see you.
It's good to see you too. My guest is Sir Ian McKellen. The new film is Mr. Holmes. Our recording engineer here at NPR West is Marcia Caldwell. The show is mixed by Kat Yor. It's edited by Blake Fight, who's the associate producer. I don't have an outside sense of anything. It's the treatment. To catch up on past episodes of The Treatment, go to KCRW.com or listen on your smartphone with KCRW's mobile apps, or subscribe to the podcast on iTunes, Stitcher, or wherever you listen to podcasts. The Treatment is produced and distributed by KCRW Santa Monica.